Have you ever seen someone who always seemed so profoundly confident, so utterly and flawlessly in control, suddenly and catastrophically crumble the very moment their carefully maintained image is questioned, even slightly? This moment of terrifying, uncontrolled implosion is the definitive, raw psychological event that happens when the armor, the mask of a narcissist finally drops. They are masters of illusion, having spent years, often decades, painstakingly building a false version of themselves for the world to adore. This fabricated version is a magnificent, highly complex performance designed to portray charm, absolute power, superior intelligence, and universal admiration. It is a masterpiece of projection. But behind that seemingly flawless, impenetrable exterior lies a profoundly fragile, terrified, and wounded inner world, a space of deep-seated shame that they, above all else, do not want anyone, especially not you, to ever see. The stakes are existential for them. What happens within their consciousness and their defense mechanisms when that mask finally slips? When the elaborate web of lies stops yielding the required results, when their manipulation is exposed in broad daylight, and when the people they rely on begin to see the uncomfortable, unvarnished truth. Today we are take a deep, chilling psychological dive into precisely what happens inside a narcissist when that mask falls off, emotionally, mentally, and fundamentally psychologically. And trust me when I say that what goes on behind that suddenly fractured facade, the sheer terror and the primal defense mechanisms that erupt, will shock you to your core. Stay with me until the end of this comprehensive journey, because once you genuinely understand this moment of narcissistic collapse, you will finally see why these individuals fight so viciously, so ruthlessly, and so exhaustingly to keep every single situation and person under their control, and why losing that control is, without question, their single greatest and most existential fear. To truly appreciate the devastating effects of the mask dropping, we must first establish a firm psychological understanding of why narcissists wear this elaborate covering in the first place. It is not merely a tactic of superficial charm, it is at its heart a crucial psychological defense mechanism, a heavy yet brittle shell designed to protect a deeply and universally fragile ego from the perceived threat of annihilation. According to extensive psychological studies, the foundation for this mask is often laid in childhood, where many individuals who develop narcissistic tendencies experienced profound emotional neglect, harsh and unrelenting criticism, or some form of psychological trauma. They learned a cold, hard, and decisive lesson early on, showing any form of genuine vulnerability, expressing real need, or admitting to a flaw was dangerous and unsafe, leading only to further pain or abandonment. Consequently, they constructed an alternate identity, the previously mentioned false self, to ensure their psychological survival. This false self is an idealized projection of everything they desperately wish they were but fear they are not. Eternally confident, undeniably superior, irresistibly desirable, and perpetually admired, this powerful persona serves as their primary armor, an impermeable barrier strategically placed between their profound inner emptiness and the brutal, judging outside world. It is the only way they feel safe to interact. But here lies the truly painful, tragic irony of the narcissistic condition. The mask doesn't just exist to protect them from the scrutiny and judgment of others. Even more importantly, it exists to protect them from themselves, because deep, deep down, underneath all the bravado, the grandiosity, and the overwhelming arrogance, lies a persistent, self-annihilating core belief that echoes relentlessly, "I am not enough. I am fundamentally unlovable." This self-loathing is the primary engine of their destructive behavior, and the mask is its denial. So let me pose a simple question that illuminates this. Have you ever observed how a narcissist can handle even the smallest, most constructive piece of criticism, even a minor suggestion for improvement? They cannot. That's because every single criticism, no matter how small or benign, threatens to introduce a critical, visible crack into that incredibly fragile mask. And once those cracks begin to appear, the immediate psychological response is pure, blind panic, followed quickly by explosive defensive rage designed to seal the breach. The mask is literally their life support system, and any threat to it is perceived as a threat to their very existence. It is crucial to understand that the mask is not merely shed voluntarily, it is violently forced off. The moment of collapse is generally triggered by a scenario where the narcissist experiences a profound and unavoidable loss of control, which leads to a direct, painful assault on their fabricated identity. This psychological mechanism is often referred to as narcissistic injury or, in extreme cases, narcissistic collapse. Here are the most common and potent triggers that shatter the illusion. Exposure of their lies and manipulations. The narcissist relies entirely on a shared delusion, the belief that their reality is the only reality. When their complex web of lies is finally publicly uncovered, and multiple people start seeing the pattern, the deception, and the absolute truth of their actions, the narcissist loses their ability to control the narrative. This loss of narrative control is devastating. They cannot possibly maintain the illusion when reality is screaming the opposite. Their mask shatters under the crushing, undeniable weight of exposed reality. The subsequent emotional fallout is an immediate, explosive defense rather than an admission of guilt. 2. Rejection or abandonment by supply. When someone they deem important, especially a primary source of validation, attention, or resources, known as narcissistic supply, walks away permanently and decisively, the narcissist experiences a deep, annihilating wound to their ego. This rejection confirms their deepest, most repressed fear, that they are in fact disposable and fundamentally unlovable. They feel this not as emotional loss, but as an existential, physical injury to their identity. The mask slips because the source of energy required to maintain it has been cut off, leaving them raw and exposed. 3. Major failure, or public embarrassment. The narcissist's self-worth is entirely extrinsic. It depends 100% on how others see them, not on who they genuinely are. Therefore, losing status, suffering a severe financial setback, having a career failure, or experiencing public humiliation is utterly devastating. This type of failure cannot be easily hidden. It broadcasts to the world that they are not, in fact, superior, powerful, or untouchable. The mask, which was built on the premise of perfection, cracks under the immense pressure of imperfection. This forced confrontation with their own inadequacy is psychologically intolerable. And here is where the phenomenon gets truly fascinating and terrifying for observers. When one of these events occurs, their entire inner psychological world starts to violently collapse. Have you ever witnessed a narcissist transition from being charming, generous, and calm to being a spitting, cruel, defensive monster in a matter of seconds? That immediate violent shift is the mask slipping in real time. The smooth, confident, attractive persona instantaneously disappears, and what is revealed is a terrifying reservoir of naked rage, paralyzing fear, and profound insecurity that they have been desperately hiding all along. They transform from a polished character into a frightened, wounded animal. When the mask drops, the narcissist does not just have a bad day. They experience what clinical psychologists describe as a narcissistic collapse. This is not merely an emotional tantrum, it is an existential breakdown. Their entire sense of self, their very identity, is fundamentally dependent on the image they have so painstakingly built. So when that image violently crumbles, they feel quite literally that they are crumbling into non-existence as well. The internal state is one of absolute psychological emergency, immediate panic and explosive rage. The very first primal emotion that floods their system is a paralyzing sense of panic, a terrifying question echoing in the void: who am I without power? Who am I without control? To instantly neutralize this internal threat of non-existence, that panic is almost instantly and seamlessly converted into intense, explosive narcissistic rage. This rage is a desperate defensive maneuver. They lash out, they vilify, they blame everyone around them, or they immediately attempt to psychologically destroy the person who exposed them. The goal is simple: if they can successfully make the observer the problem, they don't have to face the terrifying truth of their own brokenness. Have you ever been accused of the exact things they were just caught doing, immediately after exposing their deceit? That is the classic defensive mechanism of projection. They cannot psychologically hold the massive weight of their own shame, so they violently throw it onto you, their easiest and most vulnerable target. 2. Overwhelming shame and crushing emptiness. Once the initial explosion of rage has subsided, a far darker, colder feeling inevitably creeps in. For a fleeting, unbearable moment of clarity, they may actually glimpse the unvarnished truth, the pathetic manipulation, the self-serving lies, and the vast cold emptiness at their core. This glimpse is their greatest fear realized. But instead of engaging with this truth in a way that might lead to growth by acknowledging guilt or remorse, they instantly suppress it. They are incapable of sitting with true guilt because guilt requires empathy, a psychological capacity they severely lack or repress. Their defense mechanism shifts from rage to withdrawal. They go numb. They become emotionally flat, cold, and profoundly detached, often presenting as callous or bored. Inside this numbness, they are not feeling powerful or superior. They are feeling entirely hollow. The false self may have crumbled, but the true self remains too damaged and scared to emerge, leaving only the void. 3. Desperate rebuilding and the hunt for new supply. The collapsed state is fundamentally unsustainable for the narcissist. They cannot exist without external validation. Following a collapse, they will frantically scramble to rebuild their perfect image, an intense process known as ego restoration. This might involve discarding old failures, finding new people to immediately impress, creating entirely new compelling stories to replace the shattered ones, and relentlessly rewriting the past events in their favor. It is their desperate, frenzied attempt to assert, both to the world and to themselves, that chaotic, flawed person wasn't the real me. I am still perfect. I am still in control. However, the profound psychological truth is that every single time they go through this cycle of collapse and rebuilding, the new mask they construct becomes infinitesimally thinner, more brittle, and more hastily constructed than the last. Consequently, the unbearable, cold emptiness underneath becomes increasingly difficult and eventually impossible to hide, leading to more frequent and more catastrophic collapses in the future. When the narcissistic mask drops, the damage is rarely contained to the individual experiencing the collapse. It deeply, often traumatically, impacts those who are closest to them. If you have been intimately involved with a narcissist, you have almost certainly witnessed this heartbreaking and destabilizing cycle. They charm you and draw you in. They manipulate you to gain control. They inevitably explode when their control is lost, and then they immediately act as though nothing of consequence ever happened, demanding that you return to the status quo. Psychologists call this aggressive return to normalcy the ego restoration process. They urgently need to rewrite the immediately visible, recent past to instantaneously cast themselves as the undeserving victim, the misunderstood genius, or the benevolent hero, so that their fundamental psychological operating system can function again. They cannot afford to let the reality of the collapse stand. But here is the critical long-term consequence for the people they keep in their orbit. Every single time they execute this destructive cycle, they push genuine, healthy, emotionally mature people further and further away. The people who value authentic connection, reciprocity, and honesty will eventually leave. And one day, the narcissist awakens, typically in later life, to find themselves surrounded by no one but other individuals who are equally manipulative, cynical, and emotionally stunted people who play the exact same cynical games they do. They are surrounded by mirrors of their own pathology. Have you ever pondered why narcissists, despite their initial success and superficial popularity, so frequently end up intensely bitter, isolated, and profoundly alone in their final year? It is tragically simple. The alluring, captivating mask that initially attracted so many people eventually becomes the very thing, the visible symbol of their profound fakeness that ultimately repels everyone of true value. According to the consistent findings of clinical psychologists, narcissism is not merely a personality trait characterized by arrogance or vanity. It is at its root a profound pathology defined by fragility. Underneath all the complicated, aggressive manipulation, the gaslighting, and the grandiosity lies a shattered, broken, and profoundly underdeveloped sense of self. A self that simply cannot survive in the world without the constant manufactured fuel of external validation. The validation is the substitute for self-esteem. So when that essential validation disappears, when the mask drops, the narcissist is instantly forced into a terrifying confrontation with the inescapable truths they have spent their entire lifetime pathologically avoiding: their own deep-seated emptiness, their profound insecurity, and the annihilating pain of their deep childhood shame. And that, in essence, is the true existential tragedy of narcissism. They are trapped in a self-constructed prison. They are incapable of genuine emotional healing because they cannot psychologically allow themselves to face, accept, and sit with their true selves. The shame is too great. They would rather expend every ounce of their psychological energy frantically rebuilding the elaborate illusion than take a single difficult step toward facing the immense pain of reality. They choose performance over peace. But here is a piece of immensely powerful, liberating knowledge for you. Every single time you refuse to be drawn into their chaotic game, every time you choose to decisively walk away and withdraw your emotional energy and attention, you are directly forcing the mask to slip. You are giving them no psychological choice but to face their own internal truth, even if that confrontation only lasts for a few agonizing, terrifying moments before the defensive mechanisms kick back in. If you have been the one person who saw behind the mask, who witnessed the horrifying, terrifying collapse of their false self, you must deeply and fully internalize this. It was never your fault. You did not in any way trigger their collapse as a malicious act. Your mere presence and your demand for truth simply revealed their truth. You held up a mirror to a reality they are psychologically programmed to deny. And yes, following that exposure, they may aggressively blame you, they may ruthlessly smear your reputation, or they may try to systematically make you doubt your own sanity. But these actions are not evidence of your failure. They are simply the desperate, automatic lashing out of their defense system. To a narcissist, the feeling of being exposed, of having their mask removed, feels exactly like annihilation. Your emotional strength, your clarity of self-awareness, and your ability to look beyond the performance and see the difficult truth, these are the qualities they fear most, because they are the very qualities they lack. So I urge you to ask yourself this final powerful question, and be honest with the answer. Are you, through misplaced empathy or a lingering sense of obligation, still giving them even the slightest bit of attention, energy, or validation they require to keep that brittle mask alive? Or are you finally ready to step fully back, detach entirely, and simply watch them struggle to face the inevitable destructive consequences of their own lifelong illusion? Your peace is non-negotiable. When the narcissistic mask drops, the individual behind it is forced into a confrontation with the one psychological truth they cannot possibly escape. The external world no longer fully believes in their powerful self-created illusion. Behind all the practiced charm, the aggressive posturing, and the manufactured confidence is nothing more than a scared, profoundly disconnected soul who has tragically spent a lifetime running, not from external enemies, but from their own wounded self. Their collapse may be dramatic, terrifying, and deeply confusing to witness, but it is also profoundly revealing. Because for the first time, what you are seeing is not the magnificent, polished performance of the mask. It is the raw, terrified, and emotionally stunted person who truly resides behind it. And while they may be trapped in the endless, destructive loop of rebuilding and collapsing, you possess the power to choose a different path. You can decisively walk away. You can fully heal. You can rebuild your life entirely on the foundation of authenticity, self-respect, and genuine connection, something they will tragically never understand or attain. If this video gave you much-needed clarity, strength, or validation on your healing journey, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every time you spread this vital awareness, you actively help someone else break free from the silent, paralyzing trap of emotional manipulation. Remember this always as your guiding truth. The narcissist's mask will inevitably fall and fracture, but your truth, your integrity, and your freedom will always rise, stronger and brighter than before.